Welcome, my friends, to our September video. I skipped a poll this month because I had already filmed something I felt like I wanted to share with you all and thought this would be the perfect opportunity and place to do it. So I am in full-blown fall mode. It is the month of September. We have entered the season of autumn or fall, and it is my favorite time of year. We actually got real chilly here really quickly, which has put me in the mood for all the fun things that come along with this season. And what I wanted to share with you all today is actually one of my art journal pages where I have been practicing and working through concepts and ideas for classes that I have recently launched. So when I create classes, I tend to kind of brainstorm them way ahead of time, months ahead of the whole situation when it comes to releasing them. And in between the time that I come up with an idea and end up putting it out into the world, I often spend a lot of time playing and practicing with ideas leading up to the day that things will launch or move forward. This is the way that I have been able to continue to come up with unique ideas, put them out there, but also feel fairly confident when I am filming and teaching things to other people. So much of my business and what I do for a living is based on sharing how to do things. And so it's really helpful for me to feel comfortable and confident when it comes to the things that I share. And so moving into fall, I wanted to release some kind of cozy fall themed classes. I've got a couple of live virtual classes happening as well. And behind the scenes over here for quite a while, I've been working on practicing and playing with all the different concepts that I wanted to share in a variety of these offerings. And the place where I do this is my art journal. As I know so many of you know and understand, my art journal is where I experiment, I practice, I play with a variety of different concepts and ideas. And so moving into all of the different fall offerings that I'm sharing within my business, I knew that I wanted to kind of pull imagery and themes from fall, but also be able to create with things that I maybe have not played around with or shared in a variety of places. And so I started out by really exploring and brainstorming ideas. I knew for sure this season I wanted to do some stuff with acrylic paint, specifically getting expressive. I also knew that I wanted to play around with some sort of birds. And so I've been over here drawing owls and ravens, birds that are often in my own backyard, my own life, that feel like fall to me because I tend to see them often. I wanted to challenge myself to begin playing with some different color themes, really leaning into more earthy, warm colors in the stuff that I am planning and have been working on behind the scenes over here. And so I've got an art journal spread that is going to look pretty similar to things you all have seen me do when it revolves around a theme or a season. I have shared a spring themed art journal spread, but just with watercolors, a fall themed one last year. I think I did a winter theme as well, and I wanted to actually show you all what this looks like, exploring a theme based around, something that has different elements, but working really expressively with acrylic paint. So this is me really exploring and thinking about and practicing some of the things that I actually ended up teaching and filming for the classes that I have just recently launched, and will also be teaching kind of some of these elements in some of my live classes as well. And again, this is really what the behind the scenes process tends to look like for me in preparation or again in practice sessions that are not necessarily filmed for classes. I obviously film this for you all because I thought it would be a fun process to share, as well as hear me talk about a few little tips and ideas along the way of this process. I think it's really interesting as an artist to talk about what it looks like in my own process to practice, to explore and hash out ideas. I spend so much time telling other people what to do and how to do something and figuring out the right way to share it. But what I often don't tend to share is where that all begins and what it looks like like behind the scenes. When I am teaching classes, especially because I am more of an informal teacher, I'm always looking for ways to come up with concepts and ideas that could appeal to a variety of different levels and ages so that anybody who wants to take a class or learn from me does not feel limited with their knowledge, background, or age. And so behind the scenes, I spend a lot of time kind of figuring out the best way to share or do something. Often for me, this means truly just sitting down and creating and working through the ideas that I have. So again, I wanted to really lean into working with acrylic paint for some future ideas in the fall. I have a class based on ravens and crows, and then I'm going to be teaching some expressive things in my live classes coming up in October. And so that means I need to sit with my supplies and really hash out, work out, practice, play, come up with ideas that I can then pull into the things that I will be teaching. And the only way that I personally am able to do this is by actually opening up my art journal or pulling out some surfaces and creating art on my own. It's often through the process of creating art that I come up with my best ideas. And it's really kind of an interesting process because I don't set out to do or figure out anything specific. I just kind of get my ideas out. I like to think of it almost like the way you would possibly brainstorm if you were a writer and you were creating, some kind of story off the top of your head, where you kind of start with ideas, brainstorm, an outline, a draft, and then you start really going into those ideas with maybe further explanation or more ideas or going deeper into your story or plot line. For me in my process, it actually kind of looks similar. I often start out with a brainstorm where I jot down all kinds of ideas for things I'm going to share or teach, or just ideas that I have from my own work that I might want to explore further. And it's off of those lists that I then take to my sketchbook or scrap piece of paper. I might sketch things out, get them out of my head, images. It often looks really doodly and scribbly. And then once I take time to really think about it, that's when I start this process where I kind of start thinking, okay, I really want to share some expressive acrylic painting. I want to share some things that are definitely about the season of fall, but how can I do that in a different way? And I will just start kind of dumping images out of my head. I've talked about this before in a lot of my watercolor spreads based around a season or a theme, where I like to come up with imagery or symbols or things that feel very much like the theme that I'm exploring, and see how I can play with all those different elements on one surface. And this spread is definitely one of those things, and it's actually going to look a little bit similar to those watercolor spreads I've shared with you all here in this space, but it's less illustrative and more painterly. I really wanted to challenge myself to go very broad with my painting strokes because, again, I'm going to be teaching based in a lot of expression moving forward in the fall, and I wanted to really practice that for myself, but just explore how these elements will work with acrylic paint. If there's things that I might change or alter or toss out and replace, and really come up with some ideas, as well as begin practicing visually getting these ideas out of my head. It's such a strange process to have an idea from nowhere, basically going, what can I come up with? What can I teach for this season? What can I pull together that people might enjoy? And how can I make those things work? How can I get them out of my head and turn them into something visual? I think that's what is so magical about the visual arts, is just kind of starting from nothing and trying to figure out how to create those images or those ideas that you have in your head and the way that they will look and translate when you get them onto a surface. And then for me, because I'm doing this as my living for a business, I'm then having to take those ideas and translate them into things that I, turn into tutorials, classes, things that I do within my business. And it's a very interesting process. But this for me personally is what is so special about it, is because I'm able to take time to sit and kind of explore and get ideas out of my head. And so I started off with this spread just again dumping out some images. I've used leaves before. I think I've used a pumpkin before in a spread, but I have not added birds in a really, really long time. And lately, behind the scenes over here, I've been playing around with sketching and drawing a lot of different bird designs. It's probably because we have lots of birds in our life, in our backyard. I live very close to nature, and I am always exploring and trying to figure out themes from nature I can pull into the things that I share. And sometimes it's not always right away. Sometimes it's like 6 months later after I come up with an idea. But I wanted to add a raven to this because, again, I've been working through a crow and raven class that is expressive, working with brush strokes. And so I knew that I wanted to just kind of play around with how this imagery would look all together, or if I separated out moving forward, how it would work together. And so for me, it looks like dumping all of those themes onto a page and seeing how I can work with them. What you're going to notice about this type of spread versus my watercolor spreads, which you can absolutely scroll back through time here on Patreon and revisit those if you'd like to see the difference, is this page is very loose and expressive. I started out on a page that was just filled with messy color, and I am working over the top of things. I often like to sketch things out really quick, just real big, loose, messy, imperfect shapes, and then it's with acrylic paint that I will go in with layering and brush strokes and start adding all of that color. I'm not able to do this in the same way when I'm working with watercolors. I feel like acrylic paint for me, I can definitely layer and cover things up really quickly. It takes me a lot longer to map out my page or all the themes or images I add to my pages if I'm working with watercolors and drawing. But when I'm working loose, when I'm working painterly with acrylic paint, I can work really quickly through my ideas. And that's why I actually wanted to share this spread with you all today, because it's really fun to have a way to kind of get those ideas out quickly without a lot of the pressure that often comes with perfection. And that's key for me when I am exploring and working through ideas, is that I don't necessarily want to get hung up on perfection, because this is often where I am practicing and trying to kind of make my way through the images and things I have in my head. And when I'm in this kind of a process, I often reach for acrylic paint because it just, I don't know, there's something about acrylic paint. I think it's just my entire painting background and my education in college with majoring in painting. I just associate working with acrylic paint as a place that is a lot looser and there's a lot more freedom for me in it. And so when I'm trying to hash out ideas, get colors out of my head, get maybe imagery or motifs out of my head, I will reach for those acrylic paints because I can get expressive, I can work in a more painterly fashion, and I can actually pretty quickly work through things. It takes me a lot longer to draw things out with pen and then fill it with watercolors and shade it, and I love doing that too. But if I'm working in my art journal, really exploring new concepts, playing around with maybe different things on one surface, playing around with certain colors combined together, I will always reach for those acrylic paints. And this spread is really just about exploration. So picking some of the themes that I'm going to be incorporating into future offerings that are going to be based in the season of fall, and seeing how they work together, as well as giving myself the opportunity to begin practicing how I will create things for classes, how I will perhaps end up teaching them or explaining them, the lessons I'm learning along the way, and trying to figure out, okay, is this something that I could easily show somebody else how to do? If it is, I will recreate it and then turn it into a class concept. If it is a little tricky and I feel like, I don't know, I feel like this can take more practice or time, I might scrap it and leave it for somewhere else down the road. So at this stage, I want to kind of get everything started to be painted in with color. I thought I would start with my crow first because because it's kind of the focal point of the entire spread. And I'm working with a design that I was playing with for the class that I actually ended up filming. This crow kind of looking to the right hand side. I wanted lots of black, a little bit of purple and gray highlights in there. And again, I'm using my brush for all of that really great expressive detail. So I'm going to stop talking for a little bit, let you all watch me. I'll meet you back here with some more insights and tips along the way. Alright, so as this develops a little bit more, I wanted you to take notice of the fact that I'm trying to keep a lot of the different elements quite large and broad. Again, I really enjoy going detailed with a lot of my illustrative style that I do with pen and watercolor, but when I'm working this way, especially with exploration, working expressively, I like to really challenge myself the best I can to keep my painting strokes broad. So this is something I do in a lot of my painting tutorials, which is encourage people to let your strokes rest, to let those brush strokes and that paint rest instead of going in and blending and getting things blurry and soft. I'm really wanting to create a spread and a page and a style that is very rooted in expression. And for me personally, if I'm going to be teaching this and sharing tips about this in my classes, I have to really kind of encourage myself to work with it as well. So a lot of times my inclination is to outline things or to draw all over all those surfaces. But for this spread and other things I'm going to be doing recently, lately, moving forward, I really want to continue with myself to get better and explore more. As expressive as I can go with my own painting. It's a fun way to work in my art journal. It's a fun way to work on a canvas, working with that acrylic paint. You will notice that a lot of my brush strokes are showing through. I'm also letting some of the messy brush strokes show through even some of the images that I'm painting over the top of everything. And so anything that does get outlined, I tend to challenge myself to go real expressive with my brush. So even the little lines in the pumpkin, I am getting as expressive as I can, letting them be a little bit messy and scribbly here and there, and then using some of my larger flat brushes to add some real evident strokes within the surface. Again, I'm going to be teaching some of these techniques in future offerings, and so for me personally, this is really what it looks like for me to practice these ideas so that I can hash out tips and tricks to share with people as I move into turning some of my ideas into tutorials and how-to projects for a lot of people out there. Something else I was really focused on in this spread was using a lot of warm, kind of fall-inspired colors. Okay, so you all know that I love using a lot of color. I love using every single color and seeing how much I can fit on there. But I have been over here behind the scenes trying to really lean into darker colors, neutrals, warm colors. I really want to challenge myself to practice and get better and better at even using shades of brown. I'm always encouraging people in classes to stay away from muddy surfaces, and mixing all those colors together can create brown. But in my own work and in my own mind, I have also been trying to figure out some unique and fun ways to actually use shades of brown in my work and maybe not use every single color of the rainbow and explore warmer, moodier color palettes as I move forward, especially into the seasonal stuff that I like to do. And so I was challenging myself on this spread to stay away from tons of bright colors. I wanted to really just pick a few things that popped, like some of the red flowers and some oranges here and there. But more than anything, I wanted to stick with more of a fall theme and resist the urge to throw in a bunch of really bright pops of color as best as I could. I'm not always going to get it right because I just can't resist color and I love it so much. But there are more colors in the rainbow and more shades of different colors that you can utilize in really creative ways. Now, something else I did on the spread was set myself up with space for adding things to the top of those layers. I knew I wanted spider webs on this page, so I wanted to go really big, loose, broad strokes with a lot of expressive elements, but I have set myself up with that circle within that wreath of flowers to add some spider webs, and then I'm painting out some black little nooks and crannies and corners that I could also add spider webs to as well. And something I actually did was I grabbed some of my Uniball pens that were starting to run out of ink so that I could have not so bright white lines. So you know how spiderweb can kind of reflect and look interesting in the light? I thought it would be fun to use some of my uniballs that aren't so perfect and let them skip and kind of just be imperfect on that surface to kind of embrace what you observe in a spiderweb. And so I picked this big spot up above in the left-hand corner to squeeze in a spider web. This is going to be something I'm teaching in some of my virtual retreats. It's about using space and using things from fall or from autumn, even spooky themes that you can add into little nooks and crannies. And so I really wanted to play around with and explore spider webs. I'm pretty sure I shared spider webs in this space maybe last year, but I can't remember. There's been a lot of videos here on Patreon, and I love playing around with them. It's spider season here. I love all the beautiful webs in the morning. I'm so inspired by spiders. And I love the thought of incorporating finer lines into a surface, especially a fall or autumn themed surface, and incorporating something like a web. It is one of those fun little decorative elements that almost looks like a mandala, but is still very based in nature, and it's a fun thing to squeeze into places. And so on this spread, I knew I wanted to work with space and different elements. I wanted to combine those broad expressive strokes, but also go in with a little bit of line work, but not overboard, because again, I'm challenging myself on this surface, not to outline things and draw over the top of everything, but be really strategic and intentional about where I add any of my line work. So I'm going to start adding some spider webs to this surface, let you all watch, and I will meet you back again for a few more insights. So of course I would have to add some kind of detail to my little blobs of color here in that little wreath, that circle that I have around my spider web. But again, resisting the urge to grab my pens and go too overboard, I decided to grab some finer brushes and just do some very simple line work around those. I wanted to just kind of keep with the theme of my acrylic paint, my brush strokes, going a little bit larger than I normally would wood and really playing around with letting that space just be. So the flowers are a lot more simple than I would normally create. Some of the background and space is also a little bit more blank than I would normally use. You all know I love to fill all those nooks and crannies and spaces on a surface. But this spread was really intended for practice and hashing out ideas that I will be teaching. And so I wanted to stick with things that felt like they were techniques and concepts that I could teach that could be fit into very short sessions for anybody learning and trying to create or recreate something. And so part of that for me on this spread was keeping some of that space empty and open and not feeling like I needed to fill every single nook and cranny. I even debated working over the top of the white circle behind my raven, and I actually opted out of that. I decided, you know what, I like this so much. I like that there's a lot of shapes happening. There's a lot of empty open space happening, and I'm just going to be okay with it. These are all things that are going through my head as I am exploring and practicing. They are things that I'm kind of hashing out and making decisions in the moment, really listening to my gut. And when I am practicing and when I am working on my own process of figuring out what comes next, how do I teach this, how do I share this with somebody, these are all thoughts running through my head at the same time. That is actually why I take time behind the scenes to work through my new ideas and practice, because the only time I am able to generate ideas like this and work through concepts and tips and things I might teach to others is actually when I am creating. So these are all things that pop into my head when I am in the process, when I'm on the journey creating for my own process or on my own surfaces. And that's what makes my own creative process so much fun over here, is because in the process of coming up with ideas to share with you all or my students in other places, I am really able to figure things out for myself, which is super cool. It's one of my favorite parts of doing what I do, because part of what I eventually end up putting out into the world has been a lot of stuff behind the scenes where I'm discovering things as well and coming up with new ideas and falling in love with something or enjoying my process along the way. And so working through a new concept, working through ideas is really the way that I'm able to find new ways to share things, new ways to inspire, and new ways for me personally in my own work to come up with ideas that I maybe have not had time to explore or might want to explore further. I actually really enjoyed working through a couple spreads like this. I'm just sharing one with you all this month, but it was fun to do because often with acrylic paint, it's so forgiving that I can paint over things, I can change things as my ideas are kind of rapidly going. And that's what makes this process fun, especially working in an art journal, especially with practice, is that I can kind of be like firing off these ideas in my head and making them happen on that surface. I can paint over things with that acrylic paint and it will dry, and I can quickly work over with a new idea. You all will notice I've had my little heat tool with me a couple times and dried that surface. I was finally able to find this smaller little heat tool that was really cheap. I think it was like $15, and it's not too hot. I don't like when my heat tools are too hot because it can kind of bubble or crack the surface, but I'm able to have it next to me and just hit my surface really quick and get my ideas out as I might change things. So painting in the nooks and crannies and cracks so that I can then dry it and then work over the top of it. Just a really fun, fast, expressive way for me to get my ideas out as they are just flying and popping through my head. And as things begin to dry, that's when I start to add and kind of finish off with little details here and there. So what I'm going to do is let y'all watch me kind of wrap this up, meet you back at the very end for some final thoughts. the end result of another fall theme spread, but with expressive acrylic paint. Again, this is something that I worked through a little while ago as one of my practice pages to just explore, get my ideas out, and begin to figure out the best way to share and teach some of the ideas that I currently have announced recently and am moving into. I think it's so much fun to share the creative process of what it looks like teaching and coming up with concepts and ideas. And I'm just like anybody else when it comes to my art. I typically need to practice, I typically need to explore and figure out how to do something. I don't always know the best way to do it, and so that is when I tend to open up my art journal and mess around on a page like this. It's super fun to be able to share something like this with you all because I don't actually talk about it as much as I would like. I spend so much time teaching people steps and how exactly to do something, but the one thing I don't talk a lot about is how I even get to that point. And these types of pages are what it looks like. This is when I come up with my best ideas. It's when I hash out tips and things to share with people. It's also when I hash out like marketing and images and the way that I will eventually end up releasing and sharing things with the world. And it's super fun to have a community like this with you all where you support me in this space and I'm able to share some of this insight behind the scenes over here on Patreon. So I hope you all enjoyed this and I hope you all had a great month of September, and I will be talking to you and creating with you very soon.